Welcome to Life Stories, where we dive into the powerful moments that shape who we are. Today, we're sharing a story about reconciliation, healing, and the unspoken words that can change everything. It's a journey of rediscovering trust and the courage to face the past, no matter how difficult. As we follow the characters through a conversation that brings them closer, we learn that sometimes, the hardest step is simply starting to talk. Join us as we explore this heartfelt journey. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and begin today's story with us. The city lights of New York stretched far beyond the hospital windows, twinkling like a constellation of possibilities. I had always loved the view. How it changed with the seasons. How the world seemed softer when dusted with snow. But tonight, I barely noticed it. My shift had drained me, body and soul. Yet there was something else clawing at my thoughts. Something I had been trying to ignore. Lauren's wedding. My sister's wedding. I had planned everything so carefully. The pastel blue dress, a color my father used to love. The pearl earrings he had given me before he passed. The gift, a handmade blanket I had spent 2 months knitting, weaving memories of warmth and love into each stitch. It was modeled after a story my mother used to tell, of how my father had given her a similar blanket when he proposed. Back then, I had believed in love like that. Despite the exhaustion from my 12-hour shift, I made sure every detail was perfect. Because no matter what had happened between us, Lauren was my sister, and family, no matter how fractured, should always come together for moments like these. By the time the taxi pulled up in front of the Windsor Hotel, I had almost convinced myself that my invitation was just late in arriving. After all, I was family. Surely, there had been some kind of mistake. The grand lobby gleamed with chandeliers. The air filled with the scent of fresh roses and polished marble. Guests in elegant attire streamed past, laughter and clinking glasses surrounding me. A young woman at the reception desk greeted me with a warm smile. "Good evening. May I have the name on your invitation?" I straightened my shoulders, my fingers tightening around the wrapped gift in my hands. Emma Carter. Her eyes flicked to the guest list. Her brows knitting slightly, she scanned the names once. Then again. "One moment, please." Her voice remained polite, but there was hesitation. I forced a smile, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. "I'm the bride's sister," I added, as if that would somehow clear up the confusion. She exchanged a quick, uncertain glance with a colleague before shaking her head. "I'm terribly sorry, but your name isn't on the list." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "There must be some mistake," I said, keeping my voice even. "Can you check again?" The woman hesitated, then did as I asked. But I could already tell the outcome. "I'm very sorry, Miss Carter," she said again, her voice softer now, as if she knew something I didn't. The world around me seemed to blur. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a simple oversight. The truth slithered its way into my heart. An unbearable, choking weight. Someone had deliberately removed me from the guest list. And I already knew who. With slow, measured steps, I made my way into the venue. Nobody stopped me. Perhaps they assumed I belonged. Or perhaps no one cared enough to question my presence. The grand hall was breathtaking, decorated with pristine white and gold, the kind of wedding that only lived in glossy magazines. And among the sea of unfamiliar faces, I found her, Margaret Carter, my mother. She was laughing, a champagne glass poised elegantly in her hand, surrounded by guests who hung onto her every word. When she finally noticed me, her face froze for only a second before she masked it with a practiced smile. But I had seen it. That flicker of irritation, of displeasure. I stepped closer, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "They told me at the reception that my name wasn't on the list," I said, keeping my voice low. "Is there some mistake?" Margaret tilted her head, her smile unwavering but her eyes sharp. "No mistake," she said smoothly. "Did you honestly think you were invited?" For a moment, I felt like a child again, standing in the shadow of her disapproval, craving her love but never quite earning it. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "But, I'm her sister." Her smile faltered just slightly before she leaned in. her voice a hushed whisper. Outsiders aren't allowed in. The words sliced through me like a knife. I had always known I was never her favorite. That my existence was merely tolerated rather than cherished. But to be excluded from Lauren's wedding, to be made to feel like I was nothing, it was a cruelty I hadn't been prepared for. What about Lauren? I forced myself to ask. Does she even know I'm not invited? Margaret's expression remained unreadable, but her words dripped with quiet venom. Lauren is starting a new life. A successful life. She doesn't need reminders of failures like you. I clenched my hands into fists, my nails digging into my palms. A failure. That was what I was to her. Not a daughter, not a sister, just a disappointment, an inconvenience she had finally erased. Before I could speak, I noticed movement from the corner of my eye. A familiar figure, Deborah Thompson, Michael's mother, was making her way toward us. Her face concerned. She had overheard. Emma? Deborah's voice was gentle, but firm. What's going on? I turned to her, my lips parting, but no words came out. I was humiliated, a grown woman, reduced to a silenced, rejected child in the presence of her own mother. Margaret sighed, her patience wearing thin. This is a family matter. Deborah, she said, her tone dismissive. Deborah ignored her, instead looking at me. Lauren talks about you all the time, she said, her voice unwavering. She wanted you here. I searched her face, looking for any trace of a lie. But there was none. My heart clenched. Had Lauren truly wanted me here? Had she been kept in the dark? It didn't matter anymore. I straightened my back, forcing a hollow smile. I see, I murmured. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, I placed the gift I had been holding onto the nearest table. This is for Lauren, if it's not too much trouble. Could you give it to her? Margaret barely reacted, but Deborah did. She reached out, as if to stop me. But I had already turned away. The weight in my chest grew heavier with every step I took. The grand chandeliers, the floral arrangements, the murmuring guests, it all blurred into insignificance. Outside, the winter air hit me like a slap. I inhaled deeply, trying to hold it together. A taxi slowed in front of the hotel, and I climbed in without hesitation. Where to, miss? The driver asked. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Take me home. The city lights blurred through the taxi window, but I barely noticed them. My thoughts were tangled, my emotions raw. I had spent years convincing myself that no matter how much distance had grown between us, Lauren and I were still sisters. That, despite everything, we were family, but tonight had shattered that illusion. I had walked into that hotel believing I had a place in her life, only to be told, in the coldest way possible, that I didn't belong. I leaned my head against the seat, gripping the pearl earrings that still hung from my ears. My father's gift. He had always believed in love, in family, in the idea that people could change. But if he were here tonight, would he still believe that? By the time I reached my apartment in Brooklyn, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones. I dropped my coat onto the chair and kicked off my shoes, my mind replaying my mother's words on a loop. Outsiders aren't allowed in. The weight of it crushed me. I barely had the strength to pull off my dress before collapsing onto the sofa. Then, the buzzing of my phone broke the silence. I glanced at the screen. Lauren. A bitter part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her wonder where I was, just as I had wondered if I had ever mattered to her. But another part, the part that still ached for my sister, forced my hand. I answered. Emma? Lauren's voice was rushed, panicked. Where are you? The sound of her voice alone made my throat tighten. I'm home, I said flatly. She hesitated. Why didn't you come? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. But instead, I pressed my fingers against my temple and exhaled sharply. Because, Lauren, I said, my voice quieter now, I wasn't invited. A pause, a long, painful silence where I could hear the distant murmurs of guests behind her. What? She finally whispered. I went to the hotel. I continued, my voice void of emotion. I was turned away. My name wasn't on the list. That's not possible, she said quickly. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't it? I asked, feeling the anger finally bubbling to the surface. Who do you think made that decision? Lauren? Who do you think removed my name? Her silence spoke volumes. I didn't need to say it. She knew. Mom wouldn't. But her voice wavered. She did, I said, cutting through whatever fragile excuse she was about to make. She told me to my face that I wasn't welcome. That I was an outsider. Lauren sucked in a breath, as if she had been physically struck. No, she whispered. I didn't, Emma. I didn't know. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to stay strong. Did you ever wonder why I never responded to your messages? Why I never showed up for your college graduation? Or why you never got any of the birthday presents I sent? There was a long pause before she whispered. I thought you were just busy. I let out a humorless laugh. Mom made sure you thought that. A rustling sound came from her end, followed by a muffled voice. Michael's. Then another voice, clearer now. Emma? It was Deborah. I stiffened. Listen to me, she said, her voice firm but gentle. Stay where you are. We're coming to you. And before I could respond, the call ended. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. Deborah had always been the one to play the peacemaker, the one to smooth over the rough patches, the one who could get people to do the things they didn't want to do. But I didn't want to be part of whatever conversation she was planning to have. I didn't want to confront them, to hear more lies or half-truths wrapped in carefully curated words. I just wanted space. I just wanted to be alone, to process the weight of everything that had happened. But before I could even think about calling back and refusing, the doorbell rang. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart began to race. Not out of excitement, but because I knew who it would be. My sister and her family were standing outside, unsure of how to face me. And in some strange way, I could feel their guilt seeping through the door before they even spoke. I slowly stood and walked to the door, hesitating for a second before I pulled it open. Deborah was standing there, her face tight with concern. Behind her, Michael and Lauren stood a few steps back, unsure of how to approach me. We need to talk, Deborah said softly. There was no apology in her eyes yet, but I could tell she was here to make things right. I nodded stiffly and stepped aside, allowing them into my small apartment. The familiar smell of the old wood and faint lavender in the air was a stark contrast to the tension that seemed to hang over us. Deborah walked in first, and I immediately noticed the way her body language shifted once she entered. She looked around with a faint smile, as if trying to remind me of the shared history that once existed between us. She sat down on the couch, patting the space beside her. Sit down, Emma. We can't resolve this standing up. I didn't move. My gaze flicked between Deborah and Michael, who had taken a place by the window. Lauren lingered by the door, arms crossed tightly over her chest. They were all waiting for me to speak, but the silence was deafening. Finally, I broke it. So, what do you want? My voice was sharp. Is this another round of excuses? Another series of half-hearted apologies that don't really mean anything? Deborah flinched at my tone, but Lauren's eyes softened with a trace of regret. No, she said quietly. I'm not here to make excuses. Emma, we've done that too many times. She hesitated, struggling with the weight of her own guilt. But I need you to understand something. I had no idea that Mom had done that. She never said anything to me. I didn't respond immediately, choosing instead to study her face. Lauren's eyes were bloodshot, and her voice quivered slightly, as though she were on the verge of breaking. I wanted to believe her. I did, but I couldn't erase the image of my mother's cold expression as she turned me away. I couldn't ignore the years of silence, the phone calls I never received, the birthday cards I never saw. Do you remember when we were kids? I asked suddenly, my voice quieter now, almost nostalgic. The summer we spent in the old house upstate? We'd climb the tree in the yard and pretend we were pirates, making up stories about treasure hunts and sea monsters. Lauren blinked, as if the memory had been locked away for years. Her lips trembled slightly, and she nodded. I remember, she said softly. I remember everything. It was the best summer. Yeah, I murmured, and that's what makes this all hurt so much more. Because, Lauren, I didn't just lose a sister tonight. I lost the part of myself that thought we could still be close. I thought, after everything, after all the distance, we could still go back to that. But you didn't even fight for me. You didn't stand up for me when Mom made her decision. The tears welled up before I could stop them. And I wiped them away quickly, not wanting to seem weak. But the vulnerability had already slipped through. The raw emotion I had kept hidden for years spilling out. Deborah's face softened, her eyes glistening with unspoken empathy. Emma, I can't undo what's happened. None of us can. But I'm here now, and I'll help you pick up the pieces. If you let me. I shook my head, more to myself than anyone else. I don't know what that looks like anymore. Lauren took a hesitant step forward. Maybe we start with this, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we start by saying what we should have said years ago. That we're sorry. As the conversation unfolded, the silence that had once felt like a weight pressing down on my chest began to lift. Piece by piece. They didn't have all the answers. And I didn't expect them to. But what I began to realize was that there was a certain power in simply acknowledging the hurt. In finally allowing ourselves to say the words that had been left unsaid for too long. Lauren's apology was not just a string of words. It was a bridge, small, fragile, but real, back to a place where we could try, together, to heal. It wasn't about forgetting, and it wasn't about pretending the past didn't matter. It was about the courage to move forward, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. As the evening came to a close, the tension had lessened, but the air still felt heavy with unspoken truths. There were no promises, no grand gestures, but there was something more valuable, a genuine desire to rebuild. One conversation at a time. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe, in time, we could find our way back to that summer, when everything felt simple and whole. But for now, the most important thing was that we had finally started talking. And in that small step, there was hope. If you've enjoyed this story and the lessons that come with it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt life stories. Let's continue this journey of growth, healing, and understanding, together.